Thanks very much for coming along, everybody. And so my name's Chris Norbury. I'm a scientist based in the Sir William Dunn School of Pathology in the University at Oxford. And at the moment, I'm also the academic with overall responsibility for entry to the medical school. And it's no accident that I'm a scientist who's responsible for entry to medical school, because as you'll see a little bit later on, the emphasis of our 6-year undergraduate medicine course here is very much on the science that makes medicine work. It's one of those traditional courses. So I think we'll start with just a general discussion about why anyone would want to apply to medicine as an undergraduate degree in the first place. And then I'll tell you a little bit about the admissions process for medicine at Oxford. And in case any of you were able to join the virtual open days that we ran earlier in the month, a lot of the content here will look very familiar to you. So you may well find that your time is better spent in one of the parallel sessions, but I hope there'll be some new information here for many of you. So the big question, I think really by a long way, the most important question you should be asking yourself if you're currently in year 10, 11, 12, 13, and you're thinking about studying medicine as an undergraduate degree in the UK, is whether you're really sure that you want to do this, because this is quite a big commitment. Yes, at the end of this, you'll be qualified as a doctor, and there are many careers within the sort of area that is defined as medicine, many different niches that you can find there, and many of those will offer you fascinating, rewarding careers. And if you're the sort of person who's interested in using your practical skills, in some parts of medicine, you'll have abundant opportunities to make use of those skills. In spite of everything that is in sort of public domain about medicine, it's still a relatively prestigious set of careers. It's relatively secure, and it's relatively well paid as a set of careers. So all of those things could be very attractive. But at the same time, before you commit to this, which is going to be, as a bare minimum, as an undergraduate, 5 or 6 years of study, you need to know that the training continues long beyond that 5 or 6 years. And you can see that as a plus or a minus. In fact, it could be that you see that as an attraction, in that it's a very highly structured set of careers in comparison to some of the alternatives you might be considering. It's very hard work, and during the selection process, we're going to be looking for people who are capable of maintaining a high level of work over a long, sustained period. It's potentially very stressful. Some of my best friends and colleagues work in oncology, for example. That's a discipline within medicine I can't imagine that I would be able to cope with because of the stresses involved in dealing with people who are extremely sick most of the time, and many of the patients not surviving. So think carefully about whether or not you're the sort of person who could cope with the stresses. And clearly there are other areas within medicine that are less inherently stressful. And if you speak to any practicing clinicians, they'll tell you that some aspects of the job are frustrating, and there's a lot of bureaucracy to deal with. So it's important that you approach this really important question in your life with as much information at your disposal as you can find. And in particular, I just wanted to highlight this point at the bottom here. The worst possible reason for getting into medicine at the undergraduate level is because there's a sense that it's what's expected of you at some level, whether by friends or school teachers or family. It has to be your choice because it requires a really big commitment. And in my opinion, the proportion of young people at the age of 16, 17, 18 who can reach that well-informed decision is limited. So there are a lot of people who might be considering a career in medicine who are not yet ready to commit to that. And if you feel that way at the moment, that's absolutely fine. And there are lots of other ways through this sort of maze. So for example, you might consider studying a subject related to medicine as an undergraduate. And then if you still are thinking seriously about medicine, enter medicine at a later stage as a graduate and complete an accelerated 4-year course of graduate entry medicine. So lots of alternative possible routes through this maze. There's no absolute requirement that you commit to it early in your life. You could join medicine later on if that suits you. However, if you're one of the people who are sure that you really want to do this at a relatively young age, then you need to think carefully about the questions listed here. So what are your personal reasons for studying medicine? What is it about the set of careers that you find appealing or attractive? Is it some of the pros that I listed on the previous slide? Or do you have your own personal reasons for choosing a career in this general area? And by exploring those questions for yourself, you'll reach a deeper understanding of what it is that's really motivating you in this direction. And in order to make a fully informed decision, it's going to be necessary for you to learn as much as you can about what a career in some aspect of medicine might involve. And there are lots of books out there you can read about personal first-hand experience of life as a junior doctor, for example, and other books that will be useful sources. And if you have the opportunity to speak to either current medical students or, better still, current medical practitioners, then they will be able to give you a first-hand account of what the reality of this set of careers is like. And you can, as you start to think more seriously about putting together an application, you can start to think deeply about what it is that is really pushing you in this direction. Is there some early life event that you can identify that really sparked your interest in this set of careers? And you'll realize already that there's a lot of competition to get into medical school. And so are there any aspects of what you've done or what you plan to do that would make you stand out as a very distinctive and interesting potential medical student? I can't tell you what those would be, but if you think deeply about what you've done in the past and what you might plan to do, you might be able to identify those for yourself. So once you've made that decision and you really want to apply for undergraduate medicine, then you'll realize that part of the competition for places is of an academic nature, and so you'll need to have done as well as you can in the exams you've taken so far. So if you're taking GCSEs or equivalent qualifications, then do as well as you can, because for at least some of the medical schools that you might be looking at, the grades that you get at the age of 16 can be an important part of the application process. If you're studying towards A-levels or equivalent qualifications at the age of about 18, then make sure that you've chosen the right subjects. There are maybe fewer constraints on A-level subjects than you might initially imagine, but most UK medical schools will require A-level candidates to have completed A-level chemistry, for example, and usually at least one other science. But the requirements do vary somewhat from medical school to medical school, so do check those out carefully. And then beyond the academic, there are all sorts of things that you can do to enhance your application and the quality of your application, and to improve your chances of success in this competition. And some of those are sort of academic in nature, but go beyond the exams that you're studying for formally at school. So there might be essay competitions you can find. You might simply choose to undertake independent projects of your own, not with an eye to taking any exam in that area, but simply for your own satisfaction and interest. And do whatever you can to develop whatever personal interests you have that could be argued to be relevant to a career in medicine. And those, as you'll see in a moment, can be fairly wide-ranging. So the final and perhaps most important aspect of this slide here is looking at the specific requirements of different medical schools. Look at the nature of the course. You had a very nice presentation if you were in this session previously from Harry, telling you about the nature of the problem-based learning experience at Lancaster University. So that's one style of teaching, but other courses are differently formatted, and it's quite important that you identify a course that is the right fit for your own style of learning. So find out how long the course is. So courses will either be 5 or 6 years for undergraduate medicine, generally 4 years for graduate entry medicine. And think about how the course is structured in terms of, for example, how long you have to wait before you are likely to encounter real live patients. So in the more traditional courses, such as our own, you'll spend a lot of time studying science in the first few years and with really relatively little patient contact, whereas in some of the more integrated courses elsewhere, you'll have patient contact more or less from the first week of the course. And so think about how important that is to you. Now, there's one very valuable single point of information for you when you're comparing these different courses in different medical schools. It's the Medical Schools Council site, and you can find it easily just by Googling Medical Schools Council, or there's the address there. And you'll be able to compare side by side all of those different variables for all of the UK medical schools and find a course that is a good fit with your own requirements. Now, I'm going to get adventurous here. I'm going to try to involve you in a live poll. So bear with me just in case this doesn't work. But what I'm going to ask you in a moment is to identify from a list some of the selection criteria that you think we might use at the Oxford Medical School when we're selecting applicants. So you can choose as many from this list as you'd like. I'll just try to get the screen up. Okay, so I guess you can see the screen. I don't know whether you are required then to scan this QR code or indeed to do something else. But let's see if any of you can work out how to choose from the various options on this list. Whoa, there we go. Somebody has managed to vote. That's great. Thank you. I'll just leave it up there for a few more seconds in case anyone else can work out how to work Slido. Otherwise, we'll take the data with n equals 1 and maybe return to that a little later. If anyone wants to scan this QR code right now, that's excellent. Thank you. Well done. Oh, we got 5 people. Excellent. In which case, I'm encouraged to leave it up for just a few more seconds. Well, it's good to see everyone thinks we're looking for empathy. That was a hint. Fantastic. So I guess actually you may still be, once you've scanned the QR, you can probably continue to vote on that, and we'll return to it in just a moment. So I'll just return to the presentation now. I'm feeling so chuffed that that worked, honestly. Right, so once you're looking at lists of potential medical schools, you may or may not be attracted to medical schools that are very highly rated. And there are some reasons why you might or might not. So if you're looking worldwide at medical schools, there are these rankings that you can access, and there are quite a few of them available online. And so in this one, this is Medicine 2020, you can see Harvard comes out top, and sadly we only managed 2nd place here, and there's some other university at 3rd place. I'm not sure where that is. And so if you don't like the idea of applying to a second-rate university, if you consider Oxford to be second-rate on this basis, then you just choose a different ranking. So this is the Times Higher World University Rankings for 2020, and you can see that we're quite well regarded for medicine. So that's great news and really good for our collective egos here. But far more important than that, in my view, is a related data set that shows that when graduating, our medical students feel particularly well prepared for careers in medicine. And that seems to me to be a much better way of measuring success of medical schools. But whichever way you slice this, we're quite highly regarded. And that means that the competition to get in is fairly tough. And so if you want to put in an application for this course or any of the other highly competitive courses, you probably want to do that with as much information to hand as possible. So I'll firstly now just outline the nature of our course in contrast to some of the other courses you might be looking at. And then I'll run through the admissions process, and then I think we'll have time for some questions and answers at the end. So you'll know if you've looked at our course that it's one of the traditional courses which has a preclinical component. That's 3 years of preclinical study for us, and then 3 years of clinical training. So in Oxford, that's going to be based at the John Radcliffe Hospital with secondment to other hospitals in the local area. If you want full details of this course, I'm not going to describe it in detail here, but you can find full details at this web address here. So MedSci Ox Ac UK. And that will also give you very complete information about how to apply and admission statistics and everything else. We like to try to be as transparent as possible in putting everything out there for your benefit. So 3 years of preclinical medicine, which will include from the 6th term, in other words, towards the end of the 2nd year and the whole of the 3rd year, you'll study for a degree, an honours degree in medical sciences. So you might regard this as a sort of compulsory intercalation of a BA degree. This is part of our 6-year course, and that part of the course, the honours degree, is really purely based on the research literature. And the University of Oxford is an extremely research-intensive environment, and you'll have access to a very wide variety of leading researchers in their fields, and you'll be able to do all sorts of interesting things. The first 2 years are mostly taken up with the first part of the Bachelor of Medicine degree, so that's a much sort of harder grind through the core syllabus that is imposed on all UK medical schools by the General Medical Council and regulated by them. So this is the first block of core information that you really need to have in order to qualify as a doctor. And that leads into and is dovetailed neatly with the 3 years of clinical training. But as I say, full details are available here if you're interested in looking at those. So the main part of this presentation concerns the application process, because that's what generates most of the questions for us, we find. And in brief, this is the 1-slide summary. So we distinguish ourselves from quite a lot of other medical schools in that we shortlist quite stringently. We shortlist about a quarter of the people who apply, and we focus most of our attention on that quarter of the applicants who have the best chance of success. And so we pay a great deal of attention to the shortlisting process, clearly, because that's important. And that has 2 stages. The first stage involves looking at the admissions test score, which every candidate has, and GCSE performance, which about 2/3 of our candidates have. And we will then draw up a preliminary shortlist, and then we'll look at all the other applications, and we'll add to that preliminary shortlist another group of applicants who deserve to be interviewed because their potential is not really very well represented for one reason or another by the admissions test score or their GCSE performance. And those shortlisted candidates, about a quarter of them, are going to be interviewed fairly intensively. And when we're doing face-to-face interviews normally, this would involve each candidate coming to Oxford for 24 hours and being interviewed at 2 colleges. We'll be interviewing remotely this December, but the experience we think will be broadly similar. So probably about 4 separate panel interviews over a fairly short space of time. And we'll be assessing each candidate with reference to a list of selection criteria, which I'll come on to it in a moment, and we'll see how they compare with the ones that you identified from the Slido poll. And then after the interviews, we're going to select on the basis of individual college rankings. We're going to identify the candidates who've done best overall on the basis of all the information we have at that point, and we'll draw up a central rank order, and the top 155 or so will get a place in our medical school. It's quite a small medical school by comparison with some of the others in the UK. So these are the data from the last admissions round. So you'll see we had about, well, something around 11 applicants per place, and we interviewed about a quarter of those. And so these headline numbers don't really mean very much unless you know where your application would fall relative to all of these other applications. So I wouldn't be too put off by the headline numbers. In fact, they're not so different from many other UK medical schools in terms of applicants per place. And the other important aspect of this is that we are quite a small medical school. So only a few % of the UK medical school places are in Oxford. And so every year, sadly, we have to turn away candidates who are very well qualified and would make very good doctors. We just simply don't have enough places for everybody. So if you like the look of this course, and if you do put in an application, and we hope you will, if it doesn't work out, then that's no judgment on you as a potential future doctor. It's just a reflection of the small size of a medical school. So the entrance requirements for A-level candidates, which are most of our candidates, we have a standard A-level offer of A-star AA, and we ask everyone to achieve those grades in a single sitting. And the rationale for that is that if you can do that, if you can achieve A-star AA, then you can cope with the academic intensity of the course here. So it's a sort of academic threshold. Many of our successful candidates will do even better than that, but we're not going to ask anybody to do better than that by making offers other than A-star AA. And that will have to include chemistry, and along with other UK medical schools, the argument for that is that there's a limited amount of chemistry in the course, but most of the people who are teaching you are not chemists. So we ask you to bring your chemistry with you. And we'd like you to supplement that with one of biology, maths, or physics. And we really have no particular view on what the remaining A-level could be. It could be another science, if you happen to enjoy science. It could be a language. It could be history. And each year we admit students with interesting combinations of A-levels. And if you're interested in the statistics behind that, you can find those on the website, again listed here. Importantly, though, we don't have any particular preference for a combination of subjects except what's listed here. And also importantly, there's no particular advantage in studying more than 3 A-level subjects, because if you can satisfy that criterion, then we think you can cope with the course. If you want to do more than 3, that's absolutely fine, but it won't make any difference to the way in which we consider your application. So let's see what the selection criteria are. I'm just going to go back to the Slido poll. The 29 of you who voted, thank you very much for voting. You all agreed that empathy should be in there, and absolutely it is. Alignment with the values of the NHS Constitution is in there too, so you're doing pretty well. And so I think this will be in common with UK medical schools generally. Yes, we use the admissions test score. Yes, we use a contextualized measure of GCSE, as I'll explain in a moment. And importantly, the ones we don't use are the 2 at the bottom. So work experience in a clinical setting. So almost half of you thought we used that. We don't require work experience in a clinical setting because we know that it's quite difficult to get, and that the access that people have to work experience in a clinical setting might depend on their connections or their family in a way that doesn't really relate to any of the characteristics that we're looking for. So we don't have any particular requirement for work experience at all, and certainly not amount of work experience. So actually between you've worked out the right answers here. I'll just return to the presentation. I hope everyone can see this, but we can answer questions if there's anything that's not very easily readable. So these are the only selection criteria that we use. And there are 2 things that I want you to notice about this. This is probably the single most important slide I'm going to show you about the admissions process. So there are 2 halves, academic criteria on the left and suitability for medicine criteria on the right-hand side here. And importantly, there are 11 criteria in all, and only 3 of them are academic in nature, and that might come as a surprise to you. So what I'd like to stress is that, yes, we're looking for people who are academically gifted and able, the sort of people who can achieve A at A level, so that's no mean feat. But beyond that, we're also looking for all these things on the right-hand side. And when you're preparing your application, it's very, very worthwhile bearing in mind each of these selection criteria. So things like honesty and integrity, communication skills, there's alignment with the values in NHS Constitution, as you identified, and empathy, as you identified. So these are all really important qualities of future doctors, and we will try to assess those qualities in whatever ways we can, using whatever sources of evidence we can use. And on the left-hand side, one of those academic criteria that we're looking for is compatibility with small group teaching, because as you may know, one of the sort of unique aspects of the undergraduate experience at Oxford University is this emphasis on small group teaching, which we call tutorial teaching. And in the first 3 years of your life as an undergraduate on this course, about half of your learning will be in that small group setting. So if you're not the sort of person who would enjoy and thrive in that environment, then it may well be that other medical courses are better suited to you. But if you are the sort of person who could benefit from small group teaching, then we'll be looking for your compatibility with that format, primarily at the interview stage. So this is where we get the evidence from, and I think in this view, the bold items that are slightly more important than the items that are not bold, and the items that are in italics are even less important for the average candidate. Clearly, the UCAS form is going to tell us a lot about your academic criteria. If you've done an extended project, we'd like to hear about that. It's quite often a very valuable way for you to explore the science around medicine in a way that will help you to reach an informed decision about applying for the course. And we might ask you to say something about that at interview. It won't form part of any conditional offer that we make, however. The admissions test and the interviews, you won't be surprised to learn, are part of the selection process too. And what you might be surprised to see here is that the personal statement is not given very much weight. That's not to say that it's unimportant. And in fact, other UK medical schools to which you might be applying in parallel will look very carefully at the personal statement and might even score it. But we don't actually use it as part of the automatic stage of the shortlisting process. The school reference or college reference can be useful, in particular in the case of candidates who've had an interrupted education or have particular personal circumstances that we need to know about. We can get that information from the school reference. That's a very good place for it to sit. But for many candidates, personal statement and reference won't form an important part of the selection process. So about the personal statement, I've already mentioned that other medical schools will be taking a closer look at it than we might. So do give it some attention, but it's probably not of overriding importance, even for those medical schools. The most important aspects of this list of bullet points here, I know there's been an earlier session on personal statements, so I won't labor these points. But the most important one for us is be honest. We'd really like you to tell us a bit about who you are in your own words, in your own language. Don't try to use any fancy terms. Don't try to insert any medical terminology in particular. If you haven't read any books that are relevant to medicine, don't invent books that you might have read. Don't put anything down there that you're not prepared to talk about at interview. Remember, honesty is one of our selection criteria. It's one of those 11 criteria. It's just as important as empathy and so on. So don't copy a model outline statement from elsewhere, but I'm sure you knew that already. And just try and think, from our point of view, just try and think about those selection criteria that we're going to be using, and think about all the things you've done in the past and all the things that you're planning to do in the future that might be argued to relate to those selection criteria. And you'll have a really good personal statement, and we'll look forward to reading it. The admissions test is much more important to us because that's the one measure that we have for all of the candidates. We use the BMAT simply because we know that some components of the BMAT are pretty good at predicting how well people do on our course, and we're always keen to use measures that have a good evidence base behind them. So you'll know if you've looked at the website, which I'll show you the address for in a moment, that this is a written test with 3 sections. One is looking at your problem solving. Section 2 looks at your ability to apply sort of GCSE level knowledge of science and maths to interesting scenarios. And then there's a short essay writing task at the end, which we know doesn't give us much value, so we downgrade it a bit in our scoring. So importantly, this test was designed to be resistant to coaching. So if you're tempted to sign up for any of these expensive coaching courses that promise to teach you how to do the BMAT, please resist that, save your money for something more worthwhile. And the best preparation you can do is, I mean, clearly you need to be familiar with the nature of the test and the style of the questions. Fortunately, there's a really good website. The test is run by a company in Cambridge, and from their website you can download practice papers, and once you're ready, have a go at the test and see how well you get on. I can tell you it's a really difficult test. I do it myself every year just so I can share the experience with you. It's really tough for candidates, because in general they'll be the sort of people who have been used to getting the top possible grade in every exam they've ever done, or something like that. And in the BMAT, that's not going to happen. So an average candidate will get about 50% in the BMAT, and even a really good candidate might get 60, 65%. So if you download the papers and have a go and find that it's really tough, that's to be expected. And of course, we have to do that. We have to design it that way because we're trying to distinguish among a set of applicants who are all pretty good. And if it were any easier, then everyone would score 100% and we wouldn't learn anything. So the shortlisting, as I've already outlined, has an automatic component where we're going to look at your GCSE performance. And we have a way of measuring that includes both the proportion of passes at the top grade and also the number of passes at the top grade. And we'll relate that to your average school performance. So we have school performance data for most schools in England and Wales, and we'll use those to measure how well you've done in relation to all other candidates at your school. And then we're going to combine that GCSE score for those candidates who have it with the BMAT score. And because we're using both in the shortlisting, there's no cut-off score either for BMAT or for GCSE performance in order to get an interview. This is just an example of some of the data that we publish on that website that I showed you earlier on. These are the data, real data from last year, just describing the distribution of, these are GCSE grades at A star or 8 or 9. And this is the number of passes at those levels. And you can see of all the candidates plotted here, those in green were not shortlisted, those in blue were shortlisted but not offered a place, and those in yellow were successful in getting a place. And you can see that it's a skewed distribution, but there are candidates down here with just 5 or 6, with 5 or 6 GCSEs at the top grade who were successful in getting a place. So this is offered really just as a guide, so you can estimate where you might fall within that distribution, just to give you as much information as we can. And you'll find much more of that on our website. So the interviews will happen remotely this year, and you'll be interviewed if you're shortlisted by 2 colleges. And at the time of the interview, the interviewers won't know various things about you. They won't know how well you've done in the admissions test, and they won't know whether or not you've applied to a particular college. There are 28 separate colleges in Oxford that support undergraduates in medicine. And you can, if you wish, you can choose to apply to one of those, or if you don't, you can put in an open application and you'll be assigned to one of those colleges. But because we even out all of the candidates across all of the colleges, quite a high proportion of the successful applicants will receive offers from colleges that were not the college they selected in the first instance. So don't fall in love with a college is the advice I'd give them. The interviews themselves, I won't labour this point. If you go onto our website, you'll be able to find a link to an example interview, which will give you a much better insight into what the interviews might be like. They're panel interviews rather than multiple mini interviews, and we'll try to create within the interview the sort of environment, the sort of atmosphere that you would expect to find in one of those small group teaching sessions, the tutorial sessions that form such an important part of the first 3 years of the course. And we might use some aspects of your personal statement just to get the conversation going, but it should be a two-way conversation between interviewers and candidates at this point. And then we're just going to rank everyone we see, and after that we'll receive the admissions test scores and the score for each candidate from the other college and adjust the rankings accordingly, and that's the end of the process. So I just wanted to finish by just hitting on the head a piece of sort of long-standing misunderstanding of how our process works, and that is that we don't have any particular preference for any particular type of candidate in terms of which type of school they've applied to or applied from. So these are the data averaged over the last 3 years for overall success rates for UK state school and independent school applicants. And you can see that the numbers, there's no significant difference between these. They're both just short of 15%. And if you're wondering why 15% is slightly better than the 1 in 11 number that we started out with, it's because we have quite a large number of comparatively weak applications from international candidates. So actually, if you're a UK candidate and applying to this course, your overall chances of success are about 15%. And it doesn't matter which type of school you came from, excuse me, and you wouldn't expect it to, because that's not one of our selection criteria. So if you'd like to find more, then as I've already indicated, you can find it at this website here, or you can ask questions right now, or you can email them to the admissions at med school address here, or even tweet, if you like, to the Oxford A100 address. So I'm going to come back into the room now, if I can do that. And we'll see if we have questions. Thank you. Right, so I see we do have questions. I'm just going to grab some water, as you'll notice I need some. So I'm going to try to scroll back. So the first question I'm going to take is from Tyler, who's asking, how do Oxford make offers for people with 4 A-levels? And the answer is they will receive exactly the same offer as everyone else, so A-star AA. And provided one of those is in chemistry, we don't really mind what the other 2 are, as long as one of them is biology, maths, or physics. So if you're studying 4 A-levels and you can't bear the thought of giving up one of them, then by all means carry on with 4 A-levels, but we will require candidates to achieve A-star AA. So if there's any danger that by studying 4 A-levels you might just miss A-star AA, for example getting 4 A's, sadly that wouldn't satisfy the conditions of the offer. So it's important to think about that carefully before you pursue your A-levels to the end. From Hamza, how does Oxford take on students who do the IB? So again, we have a standard conditional offer for IB students. That's 39 points overall, with 7, 6, and 6 at a higher level to include chemistry. So that's as close as we can make it to equivalence with the A-level offer. And do we prefer IB or A-levels? No, we don't. We try to make conditional offers to all candidates who we think are a good match with the course. And we'll try to make the conditions of those offers, regardless of which exams they're studying towards, we'll make them equivalent to A-star AA at A-level. So probably something around 15% of our offers go to non-A-level candidates each year. And we're pretty good, or at least the university is pretty good, at knowing which grades to specify, even if you're not studying IB or A-levels. So from Tyler, how will Oxford view online virtual work experience if in-person work experience has been cancelled? Really good topical question. Well, I suppose the good news is that you'll be in the same boat as everyone else who's applying this time around. And I suppose a lot of us are learning just how valuable remote working and virtual work experience can be. So I think as long as you can explain how the virtual work experience that you've had makes you a stronger candidate, then there's no reason why it shouldn't be just as valuable as face-to-face work experience. Remember, we don't have any fixed views about what type of work experience or how much you should have achieved. From Drishna, do you have a cutoff BMAT score? No, we don't, because most of our candidates will have both BMAT score and GCSE score. So if you don't do so well in the BMAT, but you did really well in your GCSEs, then one can offset the other, and vice versa. Nadira, how do you show evidence that you have empathy? So if there's anything that you've done in the past that demonstrates how well you can imagine what it's like to be someone else, which is shorthand for what empathy is in my view, then please do include that in your personal statement, because we'll notice it and we'll take note of it, and that will count towards that component of the selection process. We quite often do ask interview questions that address the empathy criterion. And if you look at the example interview that's online, you'll see that I ask a question that requires the candidate to imagine what it would be like to be a blind person. And I don't propose to say much more about that question, but you can see how that would work in addressing the criterion. So I hope that helps. So from Tyler, again, do Oxford view an 8 the same as a 9 at GCSE? So the answer to that is yes and no. So for shortlisting purposes, we treat 8s and 9s as equivalent to A star, because some of our candidates have a mixture of A star and 8s and 9s. The reason we used A star previously was because we have a good evidence base that the proportion of A star passes at GCSE is a good predictor of how well people do on the course. And so we know that the evidence is there for A star. We don't yet have enough evidence for 9s versus 8s. And so at the shortlisting stage, we don't distinguish between 9s and 8s. But if you're shortlisted, then your interviewers will have your UCAS form in front of them, and they will see, if you've got straight 9s, that you're a very strong candidate. And so if it comes down to it, in a theoretical example, if we had 2 candidates whose applications were identical in all respects other than their GCSE scores, and one had straight 9s and the other had straight 8s, then the one with straight 9s would be slightly more impressive. So I hope that helps. Do you know if other universities, this is from Lucy, do you know if other universities also use GCSE weighting? So yes, different universities around the country will use some aspect of GCSE weighting. Some of them will use a contextualized score like we do to take into account average performance of the school, and some won't. So I think the best advice I can give you there is to consult the Medical Schools Council website that I referred to earlier on. How has coronavirus changed your application process and requirements? Good question. So so far, for the well, we have the cohort who are due to start in October, which I guess probably doesn't include many of those who are taking part in this session. But we are considering right now how to deal with calculated grades, and to take into account the possibility that some candidates with calculated grades are disadvantaged. But I'm guessing you're thinking about more particularly about candidates who are due to put in an application perhaps for the next round. So far, the only differences that we know about are that the interviews will be conducted remotely in December. We think the admissions test will go ahead in schools and colleges on the date as advertised, so we don't think that will be disrupted. and all other aspects of the process have so far been unaffected, except that we're imagining that a lot of people will include stuff about COVID-19 in their personal statements. It's been a very interesting year to be a young person interested in medicine. What sort of GCSEs are you looking for at Oxford? I think if you refer to the admissions website that I highlighted earlier, you'll get a full picture of the GCSE profile of our successful applicants. We don't have any particular GCSE requirements beyond those that are listed on that website. So from Zara, A-level predicted grades are dependent on my GCSE grades. What if I'm not predicted A-star AA? We don't use predicted grades at any point during the process because we know that they're inherently unreliable. So some teachers tend to overpredict and others, for whatever reasons, tend to underpredict. And so we're not going to make use of those during the selection process. And you'll have noticed that they didn't play a part in the shortlisting process either. From James, is it okay to mention some medical terms in the personal statement when talking about evidence? Well, if in your day-to-day conversation you would normally use medical terms, then in general, it's a bit of a high-risk strategy, I would say, because your interviewers, if you're shortlisted, your interviewers are going to include practicing conditions. And it may well be that they know a great deal about the condition that you put on your personal statement. So if you're prepared to have an in-depth discussion with a leading clinician about that particular topic, then put it on your personal statement. If you have a genuine, deep-rooted interest in that part of medicine, then by all means put it down, and we could have an interesting conversation about it. If you're putting it down with the intention of impressing the selectors, then that's probably a mistake, because they're likely to know quite a lot about it, or at least there's a really good chance that they might. So think carefully whether that's a good strategy. From LA, what does it mean by your GCSEs being compared to the average of your school? Well, school performance data are published for all schools, all state schools in England. That's the vast majority of schools in England, and most schools in Wales. And so we're able to calculate what an average student at your school would be expected to get. And if you're the sort of applicant who has done way better than would be expected on the basis of the average performance of a student at your school, then you'll be given some extra credit for that in the GCSE scoring process. So how are we doing for time? Actually, I'm just ploughing ahead without thought to what time I'm supposed to be finished. Is there
You've got about 5 minutes left.
5 minutes left, is that right?
Yeah.
Thank you. Zara, when writing our personal statement, if we have lots of scientific interests, is it better to use one to two or a few? I think it's probably wise to try to arrive at a fairly balanced personal statement. If it's a sort of a huge list of diverse scientific interests, it might look a little bit over the top. It might be better to focus on a handful that you find particularly interesting and explain why you find them interesting, explain why those interests that you have informed your decision to apply to medical schools. Yeah, I would think carefully about whether or not you need to say everything that you've done. Just be a little bit selective. But I think there's some very good advice in that direction from one of the earlier sessions. From Hiba, can universities see the other unis that students have applied for on UCAS? No. So that's straightforward enough. From Nicoletta, how is Brexit going to affect European students regarding admissions and tuition fees? So the short answer is that for the current admissions round, it's not. But this is likely to be the last admissions round where that will be the case. And it's likely that after the completion of our withdrawal from the European Union, and I'll say no more about that, it's likely that applicants from elsewhere in the EU will be treated the same way as all other international applicants. And so my guess is that that will also apply to tuition fees, sadly, because I say sadly because we've had some fantastic students in recent years from elsewhere in the EU. And it's likely that the Office of Students, who regulates student numbers in the UK, will regard students from elsewhere in the EU as international in relation to the 7.5% cap that is placed on international students in UK medical schools. It's a very contentious issue, and it's not one that I'm very happy about, but you may have picked up on that. The reality is that there's a limit to how many international candidates can be offered places in UK medical schools, and the rationale for that is that the clinical training is heavily subsidised by the NHS, and so preference is given to UK, or as was previously, UK and EU students. From Astha, do you have to get the star in chemistry at A-level? No. It might seem a bit crude, but we reckon if you can get A star AA in any subjects to include chemistry and one of maths, biology, then that's sufficient to demonstrate you can cope with the course. So we don't require A star in chemistry. Let's see. We have a question about the personal statement. How's the personal statement? This is from Oshi. How's the personal statement using the selection criteria? Is it reviewed for shortlisting? It's not used in the automatic stage of the shortlisting, so that's based on BMAT score and GCSE score, but we will read the personal statements for everyone who doesn't make it onto the automatic shortlist, and also the school reference and every other aspect of the application to check to see if there's some other reason why the candidate should be added to the shortlist. And that could be any one of a very large number of reasons. So interrupted education or illness and so on. And then how's the personal statement used in the selection criteria? So beyond the shortlisting, the personal statement can form the basis for questions at interview, and indeed it can provide information that demonstrates how well you match the selection criteria. So if, for example, you've done something in the past that demonstrates your capacity for sustained intense work, which is one of our selection criteria, and you mention that in your personal statement, then that will help to tick that box, if you like.
Thank you so much. If it's okay, can I cut you off just as it's getting to time?
That's absolutely fine. And if anyone has remaining questions, please do feel free to email to the addresses that I showed at the end of the presentation. But thanks very much for coming along.